It's the Osceola's Seminole Sidelines. For more on the Seminoles, including Osceola's coverage from veteran Seminole insiders, message boards, Osceola virtual happy hours, and more, go to theosceola.com. And right now, enter the code FSU20 and get 20% off your annual subscription. That's FSU20.
Hello and welcome to the Osceola's Seminole Sidelines podcast. My name is Patrick Burnham. I'm a football writer for the Osceola and the host of today's podcast. I am joined today by Jerry Kutz, the owner and publisher of the Osceola, and Mark Salva, who played offensive line for FSU in the late 80s and was a graduate assistant in the early 90s, and of course is our Osceola football analyst. Our special guest on episode 7 will be former Georgia and Miami head coach Mark Richt, who now works for the ACC Network as a college football analyst and, of course, was a long-time FSU assistant coach under Bobby Bowden. Well, Coach Richt, welcome to the show, and how's everything in Destin?
Oh, it is beautiful. We are blessed to be able to look out the window every day and see what God's got in store for us. We look out the window, we see sky and we see ocean and a little bit of beach if we want to look over the railing. But it's pretty out here today, I can tell you.
Well, we know you're busy getting ready for the season, so we really appreciate you joining us today. And kind of what's the quarantine been like for you, and did you think that we'd actually get to a 2020 football season, first off?
Right. Well, again, Catherine, my wife, and I, we've been happily married for 33 years and still madly in love and all that great stuff. So, and we live on the beach, so we spent quarantine here right on the water, and we kind of felt guilty because felt like we're on our 5th honeymoon. So it was good, actually.
Well, you know, you've got a busy weekend coming up with the start of the ACC season, and one of the reasons we wanted to have you on here, besides just to catch up and see how you're doing, is to take a look at what you think about Florida State and Georgia Tech coming into the season, and just kind of want to start with your general thoughts on Florida State's hiring of Mike Norvell and what your impressions have been of him so far before we've even kicked off the season.
Right, I think it's a great hire. I thought it. When I heard it, and I feel the same way today. If you watch what he did at Memphis, I think it's very similar to what happened in Louisville with Coach Satterfield coming in out of App State, coaching a team that was highly successful. Brought a lot of his people with him to Louisville, and then had the greatest turnaround in the nation, a +6 turnaround as far as wins. And I think a similar thing can happen at Florida State. I think Coach Norvell, what he did at Memphis was very impressive. He had a staff that knew how to win. He brought a bunch of them with him. And, they're putting their systems together. I know they had a little bit of rough time in the summer, but I think that happens from time to time when there's a new transition of leadership, and everybody's got to get used to each other. But I think it probably drew them together more than anything else.
Hey, Coach, let me ask you a quick question. So I've been out of coaching for 20 years. You know, you and I worked together a little bit at FSU for some good times. I look at Coach Norvell, and I see a lot of similarities about the way we used to do things. And I always like to ask this question for guys that have been in it for a while. How has coaching changed over the last several years? And, the standards that we had were very high, accountability, all the kind of things that Coach Norvell talks about. And yet, the last couple of years we've been looking at maybe a different style of coaching. But it seems to me the things that win football games are still will almost never change. I mean, is that a good statement? Or?
Yeah, I think so. I really think the great players want to be coached. I think they want to get better. I think they want to trust their coaches. I think they want their coaches to care about them. And I don't think that's ever changed. I've always felt like if your players know you care about them and you love them, and you know what you're doing, then they'll respond in a positive way. And they all want to play. And if you make a standard a certain way, if you're a receivers coach and you say, hey, if you don't block, you're not going to play, son. Well, if you tell them that in the meeting, they nod their head and then they wait and see if you're serious. But if you start not playing a guy because he won't block, or, another guy who's doing a better job of that gets more playing time, then they understand, hey, if I want to play, I better block, because I'm not going to be this selfish guy that all I want to do is catch a ball. And, when you set a standard as a coach in that initial meeting, whether you're a head coach or position coach, they're gonna nod their head and say, okay, coach, let's see how serious you are. And if one day the standard's one thing and the next day the standard's another, you're going to confuse them and you're going to lose them. But if you stay true to what you believe in and help these guys understand that this is the way we're going to do things, then they're like, all right, coach is serious, and if I want to play, I got to do it this way. So I don't think it's changed that much. I think, social media obviously has changed the world and the way we communicate and the way people have a voice that maybe didn't have a voice before. But as far as, trying to put a great team together, I think the ingredients are still the same.
So along those lines, you mentioned that when a coach first comes in and establishes his standards, usually spring practice is the first iteration of that happening. How much of a disadvantage is FSU with a new staff not being able to go through spring and then all of a sudden have to jam everything into fall camp?
Right. No, that's a big deal. And actually, as you know, Mark, really the first thing you get with your players is the off-season conditioning, the mat drills that we used to do.
Absolutely.
So before spring ball, we'd have those mat drills, and we'd set a standard in mat drills. You had to do things a certain way in your off-season conditioning program. You would put drills together where, as many as 10 guys got to do it just right, or you got to go back and do it again. And before you know it, they learn to rely on each other, and they learn to push each other and sometimes get on each other to get the job done. So you establish, how you're going to do things even in your off-season conditioning. Then spring ball, as you said, and to miss spring ball is really tough. I mean, you get a chance to install everything you're doing, offense, defense, a good little bit of special teams. You get to evaluate your players. You get to get, at least 3 really good solid scrimmages in where, that's the closest you can get to a ball game is a live scrimmage. And you learn a lot more about your players and what their capabilities are and what kind of leadership you got. So, to miss spring ball is very tough. You can do things in the summer, obviously. You can have extra practices in fall camp, but it's just not the same as having you have spring and then you have a whole summer to soak in everything you learned, But like you said, you're kind of cramming everything in, and your first-year staff, it is much more difficult to really take advantage of what you could in the past.
Well, Coach, we kind of saw evidence of that last night in the Thursday night game with Navy, who had not gone live all fall. It was the first time their defensive tackled and the first time their offensive line had gone one-on-one and things of that nature. What is your anticipation of the quality of play early in the season across the college football landscape?
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think it will be a little bit more advantage for the offenses because of the tackling. I mean, you can't – to me, you can do all the tackling drills you want, but, everybody wants to try to simulate what you do in the game. In practice, some by rule, you're only allowed so many times that you can tackle. And the other is just, you're trying to keep your guys healthy, but it's hard to practice tackling without tackling.
The only way to be good at football is to play football, right?
Exactly.
That's right.
So, I mean, I got that old school from, work with Coach Bowden. And, I mean, we went live all season long at certain drills, and you line up on that goal line and have those kind of tackling drills. But the hardest thing to do is tackle people out in space. And, that's the thing that defenses are having the biggest trouble with early in the season.
Well, Coach, obviously we want to turn our focus towards Florida State, and you've coached some of the greatest quarterbacks, not only in Florida State history, but University of Georgia history. And Florida State returns James Blackman, who was on his 4th offensive coordinator in 4 years. And can you kind of talk to us about your expectations and what you've seen from James over the past couple of years that could make him a productive player going into his junior season?
Right. Well, you hit the nail on the head talking about a kid that had to learn, four different offenses in 4 different seasons, and that's not counting going back to high school. So the kid his head has got to be spinning just a little bit, and hopefully, that the pace at which you're installing things is something that he can handle and master. I mean, it's one thing to hear it and practice it a little bit here and a little bit here, but a little bit there. But, in order to really get good at something, you need a lot of reps. And the thing is, not only is it physical reps, it's mental reps. And it's reps with bodies moving around you and in the pocket and things of that nature. He's got a great skill set. I remember him in high school. As a matter of fact, I went to visit him and try to recruit him while I was at Miami. And, he's tall. We all know he's got good mobility. He's got a strong arm. He's a smart kid. But, until he can get comfortable in the system that he's in, it's going to be very difficult for him to really show everybody what he can do. So I'm hoping, little by little they can put it in, have enough where they can succeed, but not too much that there's confusion.
Mark, going back to the spring, missing the spring certainly didn't help James either, did it?
No, I mean, you just sitting there. I look at 15 practices, 3 scrimmages, a bunch of days that you could be in pads and, let the pass rush come at you, not knock your quarterback down, but, just feel the pocket, feel the timing of the routes. And, I mean, I don't care what anybody says. You got wide receivers learning new routes. It may not be brand new routes, but it might be a new way of running them. Every position coach has his way of teaching. So you got receivers that are not quite sure right away. You got tight ends, running backs, all your eligible receivers, learning how to run the routes exactly the way their coach wants them to run it. And then you're sitting there, waiting for everybody to perfect that before you can really get a feel of exactly where to place the ball. So there's so much that it takes to really get good at throwing and catching in any system. And missing spring was a huge, blow for them for sure.
Hey, Coach, obviously it seems that Mike Norvell and his offensive coordinator and Kenny Dillingham are in lockstep with each other. They seem to be on the same page. They've mentioned it several times in their press conferences over the course of the fall. And going back to the last couple of years, there's been some concern that maybe the offensive coordinator and the head coach were not on the same page. How can it help in James's development this year?
Well, it's like when I was at Georgia, I was the head coach, but I was going to coach the quarterbacks. And but I also hired Mike Bobo to help me coach the quarterbacks, similar to what Coach Bowden did when I first got to Florida State. Coach Bowden, my first year as a GA, he was going to hire me to help him coach the quarterbacks. And as it turned out, over time, he quit going to my meetings and just let me coach. But the thing that's most important is, when I was that young quarterbacks coach, I learned the way Coach Bowden communicated to that quarterback, and that's the verbiage that I would use. And when I was at Georgia, it was the same thing. I said, Mike, talking to Mike Bobo, if we're going to coach these cats together, then we've got to say the exact same words to mean the exact same things. In other words, one coach might say a safety they're rotating their coverage, and another guy might say they're spinning their coverage. Well, you can't have 2 different words to mean the same thing to these kids. We have to be exact on how we communicate. So it's crucial that the head coach and the coordinator are on the same page, right down to the detail of how they call things. Unless that head coach is completely out of that quarterback room, they've got to be on the same page.
Coach, obviously one of the deficiencies in Florida State's offense last year were the production of its offensive line, not only in the run game, but pass protection. They bring in 2 new starters to this year's group. How much can they improve from one season to the next, and can you do things as a coach to overcome some of those liabilities if they still exist?
Right. Well, the big thing, a lot of sacks, as we know, come from a quarterback holding the ball too long. And you hold the ball too long if you're not sure what you're doing. So, again, I think it goes back to quarterback play. how comfortable is your quarterback in your system? Does he know how to get the ball out on rhythm with his feet? Does he also know, where his outlets are, so he's not holding the ball too long, waiting too long for the primary receiver to get open? He's got to know when to cut bait from one progression and go to the next. So, a lot of sacks, as you watch tape, belong to the quarterback. Most of them do, because most of the time the quarterback can at least, throw the ball, out up in the stands or whatever it might be without taking a sack. So a lot of the sacks belong to the quarterback position. Now, if you got to throw the ball away every time because your line's getting beat, you may not get a sack, but you're not going to be very productive. So obviously these guys have got to do a good job of protecting. And the other thing is, we all know, you've got to establish some kind of running game to, keep the defense from just pinning their ears back and coming after you. But when you play a bunch of freshman linemen, you're going to have issues. I don't care how great a talent is at the offensive line position. Next to quarterback, that is by far the toughest position to master. Unless you're Mark Salva, I don't think you can play as a true freshman.
Well, Coach, you mentioned the run game and running backs. Florida State's in a unique position at the running back spot where they only returned one scholarship running back from last season, and he was a backup. You've got a transfer in Jashawn Corbin, and then a JUCO signee and LaDamian Webb. Have you ever had a season where you brought in a whole new room of running backs, and what is the challenge there for Coach Mike Norvell?
Well, we just talked about how hard it is to perfect your trade if you're a quarterback or an offensive lineman. At the running back position, that's probably I don't want to say it's the easiest, but if a guy has running skills and you tell him what his track is on a certain run, when I mean track, just the aiming point at the line of scrimmage that he's going to take before he receives the ball on a run, if that cat, you getting the ball in his hands and you help him, start out in the right direction, most of those guys can, the great ones can come in as true freshmen and make an unbelievable impact. The biggest issue you have with running backs that are true freshmen or brand new, of course, is the pass protection issues. The route running and the ability to know who to block on certain blitzes and to know how to do it. And but that can be taught, with a really good running backs coach. You can get true freshmen really ready to not only play, but play at a high level. So that's the one position that, as a coach, if I had two freshmen, true freshmen that I knew were going to carry the load and I knew they were big-time ballers, I'd have peace. I could sleep at night.
All right, switching over to the defense, Coach. This was supposed to be the strength of Florida State's team last year. They moved to a odd front with a 3-4 base defense. Mike Norvell hired Adam Fuller, who was his defensive coordinator last year at Memphis, to come with him, and he has gone to more of a even front. It's multiple. They do some odd stuff out of it. But yeah. How do you think this even front and more of attacking style than what FSU played last year will do to benefit this group?
Well, Florida State, in my opinion, and history's proven it, should and can and will recruit the type of defensive lineman that you need to play a 4-down front. If you could be defensive line dominant, you can let those four guys play ball and let the linebackers and the safeties, do their thing without having to always blitz somebody to get pressure on a quarterback or always having to spin a safety down into the box to stop the run game. So if you could get your D-line to be dominating up front, like the great Florida State defenses of the past and the University of Miami great defenses of the past, when you got those big studs up front, you don't even have to get too fancy on the outside. Now, if you want to do some things scheme-wise, that's great. If you want to bring certain players on pressures, that's great. But it's nice to know that you don't have to if you don't want to. So I think Florida State should be a 4-down scheme. Not to say, a 3-down scheme couldn't be successful, but they should be able to recruit those defensive ends and D linemen, like Big Marvin, that can get the job done.
And how much going back to a system where the guys are attacking, particularly in pass situations? FSU struggled last year in the defensive backfield, but it has a lot of highly recruited talent in that defensive backfield. How can that switch to a 4-3 and more of an aggressive zone blitz, man blitz package benefit that secondary?
Well, again, if you put pressure on the quarterback with your down lineman, then your DBs are going to have a much better shot at making plays and making interceptions because that quarterback's going to be thrown under duress. So, most interceptions happen at the line of scrimmage by either squeezing the pocket on the quarterback, making him uncomfortable, or flushing him out of the pocket in the direction that he doesn't want to be running. In other words, if he's a right-handed quarterback, most people try to, set up a blitz that will force him if he has to scramble to his left and make him throw to his left. So, the more pressure you can get up front, the more chances you have for the breaking up of the ball and interceptions down the field. On the other hand, if your DBs are so good in coverage, you might say, all right, we're just going to lock down and play, some type of man coverage and allow us to bring one or two more defenders, at the quarterback. That could be a great advantage too. But, I think most people like to get offenses in that third and long, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 situation where all of a sudden you pretty much got to pass. When you have to pass, then you could start, showing one thing and bringing another. And most people get into more of an odd front in third downs if they're a 4-down scheme, just to confuse what's going on, who's blocking who. So, play good on first and second down, and your third down off defense is going to be pretty dang good.
Yeah, Coach, obviously Florida State's front fours is fairly deep, particularly inside at the tackle and nose positions. How good could that group be this year based on what you've seen from them last year?
I like them. I don't think, Florida State's recruiting, if you look at the rankings, it has gone down some from what it was for years and years, but they're still getting good football players. And I don't think there's any doubt that this group could be really good. I think when you got a leader like Marvin Wilson, a kid that not only is a great player, but a guy that everybody, listens to and believes in, he could be a catalyst to really, get that group to be special.
Well, Coach, obviously Florida State opens up this weekend with Georgia Tech, and kind of want to get your thoughts on head coach Geoff Collins, who enters his second year. He's a defensive guy, spent time at Florida as a defensive coordinator, and then went to Temple as their head coach for a year before going to Georgia Tech. And what do you know about the Yellow Jackets, and what are your expectations for them coming into the 2020 season?
Right. Well, first of all, I should not like the guy, Coach Collins, coaching at Georgia Tech and, coaching at Florida and all that stuff. But I did get a chance to visit him. My plan this spring was to visit every ACC school in the spring with my wife. We were just going to get in the car and make a road trip around the league, and COVID kind of shut it down. But before it shut down completely, we had visited Clemson and then visited Georgia Tech as well. And I got a chance to get to know Coach and watch his program up close. What you see is what you get. You see a very high energy guy that loves Atlanta and loves the community and believes in his players and coaches. And, he's got an unbelievable rebuild job. Most people say give a guy a year, and year two you'll see a lot of great things after establishing what they do. But to me, I think you got to give him 2 years before you even start thinking about that second year benefit, because it was such an overhaul of what they did offensively and the type of players that they could recruit. Their biggest issue really was offensive and defensive linemen. I mean, they didn't want big offensive linemen. They wanted smaller linemen, more athletic linemen that could, scramble block and do the things that you want, cut block, things that you wanted them to do in this triple option offense. So they didn't really have much size up front on either side of the ball. defensive kids didn't want to go there because, I mean, if I'm a defensive lineman, do I want to go to Georgia Tech and have to defend triple option football day and have guys, my teammates, chopping my legs, every day, every play? I mean, they're having a hard time. So, now they're starting to get the body types that you need to play up front in the skill position on offense. They didn't have a quarterback with the skill sets to run what he wants to run. I mean, he wants to be more spread. He wants to be in more, what people call 11 personnel, 3 receivers, 1 tight end and back. They didn't even have a tight end when they got there. That system that they were in didn't even have a tight end. So it's taken time to get things done. I am still concerned about their quarterback position. I mean, James Graham a year ago, won the job, and God love him. He's a great kid, but he's not the guy to do what they want to do, in my opinion. Had another kid, Jordan Yates, play a little bit, but now they got a true freshman, Jeff Sims, which I think Florida State was trying to recruit.
He had committed to Coach Taggart, and then when Coach Norvell came in, he decided to decommit.
Yeah, so long story short, I mean the guy's a big 6'4" guy, got a big arm, but he's true freshman. I mean, it's going to be tough for any of those guys to play great when you're still trying to get the type of lineman you need. You're still trying to get the type of skill that you need. And so I'm going to give them a pass again as far as, being in a rebuild, even though it's year 2. I think it'll be year 3 before you start seeing things get better.
Well, you mentioned the defense. They did struggle last year, particularly against the run, where they were 117th nationally, and you mentioned the issues with getting defensive front people there because of what they did on offense in practice. And obviously it was the polar opposite. They had a very good secondary, ranked 36th in the nation in pass defense. Do you expect the run defense to improve in year 2, or is that still going to be a spot that's going to take some time to build some quality starters in depth?
Well, they're getting bigger. I was just reading up on them and watching a couple interviews that their coordinator, Andrew Thacker, had. And I guess they got a transfer coming in, former 5-star guy from Florida who's now eligible, a kid named Antonius Clayton. But they both offense and defensive coordinator, all they talked about was up front. They're finally getting the body types they need, finally getting the bigger bodies that they need to compete. They got a big, they got safeties getting bigger. They got, just overall, they're getting bigger. And when you talk about their pass defense, that's a little misleading because when you're getting beat, a lot of people at the end of the game are going to run the ball at the end of the game. People aren't having to pass the football, in other words. So I'm not sure how stout their pass defense was either. But they do have 10 out of 11 returning starters. About 94% of their production is coming back on defense, which usually means a good thing.
And what are some of the things that Geoff Collins likes to do on defense, Coach, based off what you've seen over the last, at Florida, Florida and Temple?
Yeah, well, he's a 4-down scheme as well. And, most everybody's doing the same thing. I mean, they're going to play some form of 3D. They're going to play some form of man free. They're going to play some form of quarters coverage, cover 2. It's not really rocket science what these guys are doing. There's some people that play that 3-5-3 scheme, and they're bringing stuff from all over the place. But you're going to know when you come to the line of scrimmage who the down 4 linemen are and who the Mike linebacker is, and they're just going to hook up and play physical football.
All right, Coach, moving on to the ACC as a whole. Clemson is obviously the definitive favorite coming into the year. They have Trevor Lawrence and ATN back again to the dismay of most people in the ACC.
Right.
But you also got to throw in a very good Notre Dame team into the ACC this year that returns Ian Book and, a very effective offense last year. They've got some people, key defenders on defense they have to replace. But what are your thoughts on Notre Dame being in the league this year?
Well, first of all, I think it was a unbelievable coup for the league to get them to be in the league, even if it's just one season. They're also sharing the revenue, from what I understand, with the NBC contract that Notre Dame has. And, I think Notre Dame was in a pinch. They had to get some kind of scheduling done, and the only way to get it done with some of these other leagues dropping out was to join the league for a year. And, Notre Dame's used to standing alone, and all of a sudden they're being compared to other teams in a league. Their players are being compared to other players. I mean, you talk about Ian Book, and, a lot of people think he's one of the better quarterbacks in the country, but, he could be the fourth or fifth best quarterback in this league. You got Trevor, and you got Sam at North Carolina. You got Mikael Cunningham at Louisville, who I love, and this De'Aaron King that Miami got is an unbelievable player. So all of a sudden Ian Book's being compared to all these other quarterbacks in the league that he's not used to being compared to. I personally think it was great for the league, and I think it's a tremendous risk for Notre Dame. I mean, if you're Notre Dame and you're used to standing alone and everybody has a certain perception about your program, and then you go in the ACC, which some people think isn't the strongest league in America, and you end up losing, 3 or 4 games, all of a sudden, you're sitting there in the middle of the pack of the ACC. So I think the risk for them to play in this league is a very big risk, and it'll be interesting to see what they can do. And I don't want to get too long-winded, but since 2017, they're 14-1 against ACC opponents. So you sit there and say they've been dominating the ACC, but the reality was that was regular season games. They played Clemson in the college football playoff in 2018, lost 30-3. And of the other teams that they played in the regular season, only one of them, there was 10 that finished in the top 35 during that time frame, and they only played one of them. And that was Miami when I was there, and we beat them 41-8. So, they've been beating who they're playing, but they played probably the weaker part of the schedule. And we'll see what happens now when week in and week out they're playing ACC competition.
Coach, obviously a lot of people are thinking it's going to be Clemson and either Notre Dame or North Carolina in the championship game, and those are probably the top 3 teams going into the preseason. Who are some teams that you think could be surprise teams in ACC this year?
Right. Well, don't sleep on Louisville. I think Coach Satterfield, as I mentioned earlier, has done a wonderful job. Coaches that are used to winning tend to go to the next program and win there, and that's exactly what happened when he was at App State and went to Louisville. Coach of the year. They've got a loaded offense. Again, I mentioned Mikael Cunningham. They got a receiver, Tutu Atwell. Javian Hawkins is a great running back. And they've got other guys that can go and play ball. And he's got a strong running game, great play action pass. Their defense struggled last year, but they're going to be a lot better. I think they're a team that can do it. I think Florida State can play well, and if they get on the right track, something good can happen for them. I think Miami, people say, is Miami back? I don't know, but they do have a quarterback who's legit in De'Aaron King. So there'll be some teams that can line up and play, and even Virginia Tech's got a chance to be pretty good. So Pitt thinks they have the best defense Narduzzi's ever had, so at any school. So we'll see what happens. But you mentioned the top, 2 or 3 schools in North Carolina, Clemson, and Notre Dame. But Louisville, Miami, Florida State, even Virginia Tech, Pitt, they'll make some noise somewhere along the way.
Mark, you mentioned you've been talking about North Carolina. What kind of a job did Mac do in his first year, and with a freshman quarterback, a true freshman in Sam Howell, who has surprised me at how he's been?
Well, what he did is he got Sam. I was at Miami, and I kind of knew there was a chance he might change his commitment from Florida State. So we were working really hard to get in there and get a visit and all that kind of good stuff. And it just made too much sense for the kid to stay home when Mac Brown showed up. Mac had the history of winning a national championship at Texas. already a Hall of Fame coach. He did great things while at North Carolina, so there was a lot of credibility when he showed up that, hey, maybe staying home is the best thing for me. And the guy's special. He's already a full-grown man physically, and coach's son, he's exactly what you would think you would get in that, as far as a guy that understands the game and understands the pressure of the position. And he just lit it up. I mean, what do you have, 38 touchdowns or something, some kind of crazy true freshman record. That's what he did. That's what Mac did. He got lucky. He got lucky and got a once in a generation quarterback there in Sam Howell.
What makes Sam Howell that good, Coach? I mean, I watched him some on film from high school, and I didn't see him. I mean, I hate to admit this, but I just didn't see him lighting it up that quickly.
Yeah, well, again, when I talked about his physical stature, I mean, he is. I saw him at an awards banquet last year, or whenever it was. I think it was last year, and he is. His lower body is thick. His upper body is thick. He's got a thick neck. He's just a big, strong, muscular kid that can take the punishment. We're like, Blackman shows up and he's a skinny kid. Like, hey, Blackman, let's get in the weight room and get a little more physical, because you're going to have to take some shots in this league, and we need you to be ready for that physically. Well, this guy was already physically ready for that kind of thing. He moves around well, but he's just very tough physically. He's very tough mentally, and he is a very pure passer. His technique is. If I was quarterback's coach, I wouldn't touch one thing with how he threw the football. He was very well taught in his high school days, and he just had all the ingredients from a skill set that he needed, and then he got surrounded by some really good skill guys too, and they're all back.
Well, Coach, obviously your job today is not as stressful as the one you had a couple of years ago. But
right.
instead of breaking down one team a week, you're breaking down 15 teams a week. Can you kind of tell us what your weeks are like? Even though you're breaking it down from the beach, you got to be pretty busy still.
Well, the busiest time is the preseason, because that's the one where you don't really know a lot about how every team's going to do. You have to look, you have to project a little bit about who's going to be new starters and all that kind of thing. So the preseason is the most prep that you really do. And these, we just had a 2-hour preseason show, another hour show on some predictions. And then you start having your shows during the games on game day Saturday. But that's more fun because it's not as much of a preview. You watch the games, you talk about what you just saw, and then as the season rolls along, everybody starts to separate themselves by position and by team, where it becomes a lot easier to prepare for those days.
Well, Coach, we know you're busy, got a busy schedule, but want to thank you for joining us. And, of course, Florida State has Georgia Tech this week, and then has an off week, then goes and plays a team you're very familiar with, the Miami Hurricanes. Right. We'd love to have you back to talk Hurricane-Seminole rivalry. You've been on both sides of it as a player and a coach, and we'd love to get your thoughts, so we'd love to have you back sometime.
All right, maybe we can work that out.
I want to thank you for your time, Coach, and best of luck this season. I look forward to seeing you on the ACC Network.
All right, great to talk to everybody. Good luck.
This has been another edition of the Osceola's Seminole Sidelines. To subscribe to the Osceola, go to theosceola.com. Go Noles!